Welcome everyone back from the coffee break. Find your seats. Our last presenter before the panel is Danilov from the Estonian Parliament's Foresight Center. Estonia ranks 25th in the Global Innovation Index, so it's pretty good in terms of international comparison. And our e-government success story has convinced the world that at least our government is the most innovative one in the entire world. But then we look at the facts like the OECD just published, that in terms of companies bringing on the market new innovative products, we are the very last among OECD countries. So this demonstrates that the valley of death is wide and large. So Estonia has a lot of challenges before it to bridge it. So please, Tea, tell us about the challenges before Estonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and a challenge to be here and try to introduce the Estonian case, especially after such distinguished speakers that we have a chance to listen to this morning and also the early afternoon. However, I'll give my best. And I promised Anne previously that I'm going to have an analytical presentation of the findings of different pieces of research which has been done about the situation in Estonia, in the innovation landscape. However, as I have been in this field pretty long, for more than 10 years, being active and responsible for designing the innovation policy and also executing it from Enterprise Estonia. So it's really tricky to avoid some personal beliefs and convictions to block them creeping in. So partly I do represent some of the doubts and beliefs that I have developed in the way on course of my professional life, and I have been in Ministry of Economy for more than 10 years, designing the innovation policies and enterprise policies, and then I went to Enterprise Estonia and tried to execute all these fine policies I had designed back in the ministry, and it turned out to be a really eye-opening experience, and I'm glad for the chance, indeed. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how the innovation policy thinking has been evolving in Estonia throughout the last 15 years. Some of them are familiar to it, but perhaps not all of you. Then I have picked some selected results. It's by no means exhaustive. Someone else would have picked something different, so it's really subjective. Anyway, I would like to highlight some facts and figures. And then I'll come to the dilemmas that we have been encountering throughout the way, and also the perhaps questions that need to be answered in order to go further. About the evolution of the R&D and innovation policies in Estonia, I tried really to pinpoint some of the phases, and again, it's perhaps not exhaustive. However, we started off around 2000 or even 1999 when the Estonian Technology Agency was established. And the policies were based on the market failure concepts, and we heard about it from the presentation of Uwe Kantner, that there are very high risks related to the innovation projects, so the entrepreneurs are not really willing to take them, and in order for the investments to be on the socially optimum level, the state should step in and try to share these risks with the entrepreneurs. And the baseline program or the baseline intervention back at these times was the R&D funding scheme for companies, so that they could apply for co-funding from the state to undertake risky and R&D intensive projects. And the innovation vouchers were introduced along the similar lines, that we really need to bridge the gap between companies and universities, and for the companies to make the very first step and try to find the right door in the university to help to solve some technological issues that the companies might have. So the innovation vouchers was the next step along the lines of there is a market failure and we need to bridge it. And I would like to especially mention the state venture capital, which was basically the creation or the establishment of the Estonian Development Fund back in 2006. And I dare to say that back then, in 2004, 2005, there practically was no venture capital market in Estonia. There were some angel investors around, but they were not really acting systematically or according to standardized procedures, and not really networking with each other. And well, my claim is, perhaps a bit too pretentious, my claim is that with the creation, with the establishment of the Estonian Development Fund, actually the Estonian venture capital market started developing, and there's now it has come to the point when it's already a self-sustainable development going on there. Well, pretty soon we actually arrived at the conclusion that supporting individual companies is perhaps well, yeah, good, but if you support them group-wise in terms of clusters, in terms of competence centers, it might even have more leverage. It might be more amplified as an effect on the economy. So the competence centers and the clusters were established, and they could apply for support. And the national R&D programs, which was a short-lived period actually, but I would like to mention it because it was along the lines of this grand challenges-driven policy design, or then the mission-oriented R&D policy, that we really tried to commit some special budgets for a particular fields, then being material technologies or energy technologies or healthcare. And this special budget then meant that the actors in this particular field were kind of safeguarded from the general competition, so that they had their resources of their own. They competed perhaps in between themselves a little bit, but they were safeguarded from the general, kind of lifted out from the general competition for funding. Then the next mainstream was the demand-led policy, and it was around 2010 when this kind of thinking started to grow and evolve. And the building of charging system, the countrywide charging system for electric cars, was one of the initiatives back at these times that was meant to trigger the private investments and also have a greening effect on an economy. Then other platforms like membership in the European Space Agency, through which Estonian companies can have access to the Space Agency's activities, funds, or then the e-residency as a platform is a perfect example of how the government can be a catalyst for private sector innovation, for the following private sector innovation. And actually there is a more general public procurement scheme actually open in Enterprise Estonia, which is a top-up fund for public institutions who really who need to procure something and would really like to do it really like to buy some innovation, some solutions which are not yet around, but what need to be developed first. And this co-funding option is actually there, open for the public institutions at the Enterprise Estonia. And the latest buzzword is actually the digitalization of industry. As we all know, Estonia is scoring high e-government rankings. However, the digitalization in industry is on a more moderate level, and as I know, the industrial policy green paper that was recently approved by the government includes actually a lot of initiatives towards having more digitalization in the industry. Well, it seems to me that at least something we must have got right. It is one of the quite recent study of Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and it measures the adequacy of policies among quite many countries, 56 countries, and it measures two things. First, the level of beneficial policies which stimulate innovation, and the level of harmful policies that kind of stuck or are obstacles to innovation. And innovation policies are here meant on a much broader scale than I just was explaining you in the previous graph. It's not only this kind of hands-on or active support policies, but it's also policies related to education, to corporate taxation, or perhaps frictionless trade and free movement of people around across the borders. So as you see, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, as you see, Estonia is in the right corner. The upper right corner is the best society we can find in this study, and it means that we have had above average beneficial policies and below average harmful policies. Another one, very recent, it was actually released a couple of weeks ago, and it ranks countries according to the intensity of the brain business jobs. And I'm not going into details how these jobs are measured. They are measured in the company sector, in the private sector. I can't go into details because of time constraints, and of course all these results are dependent on the methodology which is used, and should we use a bit different methodology, perhaps the result would have been different. However, if you look at this country profile here, in terms of where do we find these brain business jobs or jobs that require sharp brains in the Estonian economy, then we do find them mostly in telecom, in ICT, and in fields that are characterized by the presence of creative professionals. But we don't find them so much in engineering and also in R&D, and it is meant that the R&D specialists working in industry, in the private sector. Of course, we do have a quite adequate supply of researchers in the academia, but not so much in the private sector. But nevertheless, Estonia has achieved a quite remarkable 10th place here, so no need to be ashamed. Well, and this is the story I already told you, the development of the venture capital market, especially in the seed and startup phase. And as you may see, 2016 has been a record year in terms of how much the Estonian companies have attracted venture capital, both from Estonia and from abroad. Well, a picture about enterprise academia cooperation as well. This represents the share of funds given to the universities by companies, and of course not as donations, but as on contractual basis, with an expectation to get something in return, some knowledge and solutions to the technological issues and problems. And as you see, it's quite nice. Sorry, it's quite nice upwards trend actually happening here in the last 3 to 4 years. And there is one reservation to this graph, and that is that it also counts for the foreign companies. So I can't really differentiate out of statistics how many of these contracts are with Estonian, with local companies, and how many of them are with foreign companies. So it might be in favor of the foreign ones, but I'm not sure. Okay, and this brings me to the very first dilemma that I wanted to tell you about. And I've phrased it the target group dilemma, excellence versus extension. And by excellence, I mean these companies who are the R&D performing companies who are capable of doing R&D, who know what it means. And quite many of the policy programs, especially in the beginning, around 2000 and some years ahead, were designed to target this particular group of companies who are capable of performing collaborative R&D together with universities. However, the number of such companies is actually pretty low in Estonia, and it has not increased remarkably throughout the last years. So, as we see, we are around 250 companies who report or declare R&D expenditures to the Estonian National Office, and our peak was here at 300 some 7 years ago. Although here is this reservation that, as I've heard from the business community, that this questionnaire of the statistical office is so tedious, long, and comprehensive that quite many companies just avoid filling it out, and they just declare they have no R&D expenses whatsoever. It's much easier. So it might be that some of them are hidden somewhere, but still it's just a couple of hundreds. While by extension, I actually mean that reaching out to those companies who are not yet capable of R&D and thus extending the range or extending the scope of innovation policies. And here perhaps this picture is a good illustration of the situation. I apologize for the quite old data set, but this was the one and only that I could derive from the statistical office, and this query or questionnaire probably has not been repeated recently. But the issue actually is that quite a number of Estonian companies who are active, especially in manufacturing, are actually subsidiaries to multinational subsidiaries to Western companies, and that basically means that they fulfill their role in the value chain, and if it happens to be the role of producing things, the role of manufacturing things, then it means no need or no demand for R&D, and deriving from that, no need for cooperation with the universities, for example. And this was the study that was made a couple of years ago and commissioned by the Minister of Economy, and it was a great one. I've read it practically word by word. So this came out with this very actually obvious conclusion, as we all tend to know it, as we do read Estonian newspapers and have an understanding of what is going on, that the most prevalent business model in the Estonian manufacturing is the order manufacturing, or in other words, the subcontracting. And what does it bring along, especially these issues? And also in one of the presentations from the morning, we heard that in order to be innovative, you need to get some ideas of what is going on among your customers, what is going on in your target markets. And the subcontracting companies, they don't have this touch. Because the parent companies are holding at their hands these more high value-added phases of the value chain, be it then in the product development phase, or be it then in the marketing and distribution phase. And therefore, I would encourage us to think along these lines, as it is already also quite nicely put by two distinguished academics who were commissioned by the European Commission to do an audit of the innovativeness, of the stance of innovation in the EU broadly, and they came out with one of the conclusions they came out with is that we actually need to allow expenses in such taboo fields as marketing, which has traditionally been viewed as too far from the lab bench. And if I'm saying that we need to allow, so perhaps as we have guests from the States, it basically is about the state aid rules, as if we are in Estonia want to promote R&D, subsidize the R&D projects, then we have to follow the state aid rules set in place for R&D, and marketing is not among the allowed expenses in this framework. So, but it's not only about marketing, it's about the ways to reach out to these companies who are not yet active in R&D, and of course they cannot jump from being subcontractors to doing collaborative research together with the universities. There are some steps in between. This is the bridge we need to build, and unfortunately, there are no good textbook lessons for it, as there are around, for example, about how to grow a startup or even how to commercialize the IP from universities. Well, another dilemma that I would like to bring forth is the dilemma of constant policy innovation versus consistent high-quality execution. Before going to that, I would like to show you this quote. That was back in 2007, when there was an assessment of the Estonian system run by EU Commission, if I remember correctly. And they stated out that there are quite, up-to-date programs, measures in the Estonian innovation support landscape. However, they pointed that perhaps the capacities of the execution system should be increased, that they were really worried if this execution system is capable of handling all of these initiatives and programs. And indeed, this seems to be the case, having seen the system from inside out. So I would also argue that as we launch new initiatives constantly, and there are quite many of them with there are quite many of them in different agencies, so they start competing with each other. They start competing for budgets, of course, the first thing, but also for the execution resource, the human resource for high-quality execution. And so if we do launch new ones, then actually we kind of weaken our capabilities to get good results out of the previous ones. And this is the dilemma that needs to be managed. And this is one of my favorite slides, and it is kind of an example how we try to, if I say we, it's the Ministry of Economy and Enterprise Estonia and then some other stakeholders. We really try to consolidate some measures and come up with a kind of comprehensive approach, which is not that along the lines that I do have the policy measure with the goals and now I need to find suitable companies, but rather the vice versa. What are the issues of a particular company and how I can gather different policy instruments around the needs of this company to really give the company a boost, a significant boost that it needs. And this is basically the company's development program, which is run by Enterprise Estonia, and I had a chance to help to launch it. And it starts with mapping the company's needs, then it goes on to putting the company in contact with different kind of technologies, market practitioners, to really try to shape and refine the strategy that the company has. And of course the company has to have enough ambition. There is such a threshold that company needs to grow 10% a year, 3 years in a row after it has implemented this development plan, which has been put together with different kind of mentors and market practitioners. So, and after that, after the development plan is there, so different instruments, different support programs can be thrown to help to implement it, and not only the support programs implemented by Enterprise Estonia, EAS, but also others from CREDEX, Environmental Investment Center, Archimedes, you name it. So this kind of one-stop shop concept, to my mind, is pretty important. And this is the last point I would like to make, and this is the one about magnitude or the scale of effects that we can actually trigger or drive with the innovation policies. And just to give you an idea, these numbers originate from previous years, so there might be some changes happening. Anyway, I think the magnitude is correct, that the turnover of companies in Enterprise Estonia yearly is around 1,500 companies. And not all of these support programs that I have listed here are kind of thorough and really kind of giving a strong boost, but some of them are rather of light touch type, for example, the export services. And well, yeah, one of the issues is that should we consolidate now the range of instruments and also the programs from other implementing agencies, should we consolidate them together around needs of some carefully selected companies, then what are the principles to select those companies? Perhaps they should have some significant number of employees, some significant number of turnover, not of course too large, because then there's the risk of so-called dead weight loss will emerge, meaning that they would do the same things without any support anyway. But perhaps I've got it wrong. Perhaps some other parameters are important here to really carefully select the few numbers of companies that we then address in a more systematic, in a more kind of even generous way. But this is one of the issues, and another actually is that how many companies do we have to address yearly or in 5 years, in 10 years, in order to have a significant or at least a noticeable effect in exports, in GDP, in export growth, in GDP growth. And this kind of calculation is just not there. The normal managing goes along the lines that let's see how much do we have budgets, let's see whom we select, and then what is the realistic assumptions that they will grow together with the help, and then we can calculate what kind of effects we can trigger in terms of exports and GDP, and it might turn out that it's non-significant. So the calculation must be reversed, starting from which are the effects that we want to drive, we want to trigger, and then how many companies do we have to address, in which way, how do we select the companies, and then what are the budgets needed for that. So, and this is to conclude, it seems to me that there are, of course, there are always two sides of a coin, and also in this case it takes two to tango. So we really need to address both sides, the motivation of universities to collaborate with companies, but also to address the demand from companies and to try to come out with more extension measures, dissemination measures. We should not neglect or underestimate the power of new-to-firm innovation, which is a way to really disseminate the innovative solutions among the companies. And one-stop shops, and which is also important, the low overhead ways of support, because quite often the help that we provide to the companies is so heavy in terms of different regulations, norms, questionnaires to be filled out, applications, reports, that it just, the effect might get missing. And Yeah, when I say that we need to more carefully select the individual companies for support, then of course the other kind of way of thinking about it is that instead of targeting just individual companies, we should more work with clusters, sectoral clusters, thematic clusters, and this is also the way to reach out to more and more companies. Well, this was it. I hope I wasn't too much exceeding my time limit. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Thea, for a very thorough presentation. I have a question. Now, having very thoroughly studied the Estonian innovation system and listened to the different presentations today, what would be your, let's say, 3 recommendations to our Prime Minister, how to improve our innovation system?
Yeah, well, it's much easier to articulate the questions than to offer answers. Well, it's tricky. Well, I have to admit, I quite liked the approach that Uwe Kantner presented, that you should have, as a country, you should have some kind of field-based or mission-based or area-based programs or initiatives, and then there has to be some baseline or some, as I call them, the extension measures, be it then in the form of tax credits or in some other forms, but which are not heavy to implement in terms of bureaucracy, and which then are reachable or available to quite a number of companies.
All right, any questions from the audience?
Everybody's tired already, or then waiting eagerly for the panel discussion to start.
Yes, we will ask all the difficult questions at the panel. But before I give a present to Thea, I would like to say that when I was planning to organize this conference, when I just had the idea, I was thinking, who should I talk to who would understand the importance of it? And it was Thea. Thank you, Thea.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks to you that this happened.
Okay.